Okay, team. So at this point, you should have finished your GIF file. If I look at the side scrolling background, I went ahead, I made a GIF of my simple background. It's just one layer. And I already explained how to do that in Adobe Animate, and my character, who is a static, unmoving character. I set him in one spot and I just leave him as a keyframe the whole time. So that should be done. Once you get that done, go ahead and export that as a GIF, and we're all good. Then you're going to be ready to move on to making a more complex background. And I want to talk about that now. So I'm here in Adobe Animate. Sorry, I'm in Adobe Illustrator, different. And what I've done is I've actually gone ahead and I've made several different layers. So there's a couple ways to do this. One is you can create new documents. You can always use the same dimensions of 3 inches by 21 inches that you made originally and make a couple new documents. So I've got actually 2 layers. I've got a background layer, which I called snow scroll. I could have called it sky. I don't know. But again, it's just one long, wide layer. And I've got a couple different pieces. Now, this piece, and this piece out here are actually the same layer made multiple times. You can always go wider than your canvas. And actually, what I'm going to do, let me hit Command 0, is for my farthest back layer, which would be my sky, I do want it to be actually substantially wider than my other layers. So my sky, the farthest back layer in my whole thing, since that's the farthest away, that's going to move. I'm going to have it move a little faster just to have it have some action in it. So I made it go beyond the edge, and that is absolutely fine. So again, you can see some of my shapes are just repeated. I just transformed them, and this cloud is the exact same as this cloud. This cloud, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all the exact same, just different sizes. So I did this really quickly. And then when I have my sky or my farthest back layer, how I want it, I'm going to export that as its own PNG file. So I'm going to go to File, Export, Export As, make sure it's an PNG, call it what I need to call it. I am not going to click Use Artboards. Do not, because I have stuff off the edge of the artboard that I want to keep. Then I'll hit Export. That's going to say how, resolution, you can put it at medium, 150, background color, you could do white or transparent. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to hit OK. I'm not actually going to hit OK because I already saved this, but you would hit OK. Then on a separate document, I've gone ahead and I've made this layer, which is my middle ground. Now, it's not the farthest away stuff. The sky is the farthest away stuff. And I've made a middle ground. And you can see that once I stop my middle ground, I don't have any background behind it. It's transparent. This should be also on a 3-inch by 21-inch canvas. We'll just go ahead and enter that. And it fits. So I can see now it looks like I have a white background. I don't really. It's just that the stage itself is white. So I filled it with different things. Obviously, I use the same tree every time because I was lazy and being quick for y'all, but you can do more specialized stuff if you want. But this layer, the middle ground, is separate. So if I take it off the canvas, you can see that there's no sky. So this layer is going to move at a different rate than everything else. And then I've decided that the thing I want to be closest in my video, the foreground, is just going to be a tree. So I've made a third separate document, which is just a tree. All 3 of these, my foreground, which is a tree, or whatever you're going to choose, my middle ground, which is a whole landscape with no sky, and my background, which is going to be the sky. For all 3 of those, when I'm done with them, I'm going to export them as a PNG. Now, for my middle ground and my foreground, when I export, I need to be sure. I go to Export, Export As, PNG. I need to make sure when I hit Export, that's fine, replace, that I have a transparent background. That is crucial. 150 would be fine. So 150, transparent background, you must do. Okay. So I've done all these things, and now I can go ahead and go out of Illustrator, and I am in Animate. So when I go to animate, I'm going to start a new document. It's a new, so let's kill this. Oh, no changes. So I'm going to go up to File, New. It's going to give me my template. I'm going to choose Action Script 3.0. Okay. So what I want to do now is I've saved my PNG files that I just made in Animate. They're here in this little folder that I made. And I'm going to drag them to my library. So make sure you're clicked on Library on the far right in Animate. And I've got a couple things. I've got my Snow Sky PNG. So I'm going to drag it in and drop it in my library. I've got my Snow Scroll, which is my middle ground. I'm going to drop it in. And I've got a tree. And I'm going to drop it in. Then I can go back into Animate and make that the bulk of what I'm doing. So I'm going to get ready. So I've got one layer in Animate right now. And I'm going to rename that background. Go ahead and please name your layer background. And I'm going to then drop in from my library the PNG of the farthest away object. For me, it's the sky. I can click and see which one that is. Here it is, sky. I'm just going to physically grab it and drag it on and release it onto my stage. So it's here, awesome. And if I need to adjust it, I can always, I can go to transform. I can use my transform tool, and I can hold down Shift so it stays to scale. I can scale it however I need. I can move it up there. It's great, and you'll see now that it's on this first frame. It's a keyframe because there's something on there. I'm going to go ahead and drag it all the way to one side so it's up against the edge of the sky. Then, since I am doing a 240 frame animation, I'm now going to go to frame 240. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go up to Insert, Timeline, Keyframe. And now it's filling it with this. Now, obviously right now, if I were to play my animation, nothing happens, which is not good. So what I need to do is go into frame 240, click on it, and now I'm going to move my PNG file all the way to the other side. Now, if I just left it there, it would not be a very exciting animation. So I need to go about halfway. If I'm going from 1 to 240, about halfway would be at about 120. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose Create Classic Tween. Boom. And what it's going to do is fill in all the gaps from frame 1 to frame 240. So now, if I hit play, my sky moves across my stage as I need it to. And it's done. So cool. That was great. I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to go into my timeline again, and I'm going to click on a new layer. So right down here, the new layer icon, and I'm going to call this one, double click, and name it Middle Ground. Great. On my middle ground, I'm going to click on frame 1. Be sure to click on frame 1. Actually, before I do that, let me back up. I'm going to go to my background layer, and I'm just going to lock that down so that I can't accidentally mess it up. And by clicking on the circle underneath the lock icon. So I'm going to go into frame 1 of my middle ground layer. I'm going to choose my Snow Scroll PNG. I'm going to drop that in. And similarly, I'm going to resize it a little bit by going to my transform tool. I can hold down Shift so it resizes in proportion. I'm going to make sure that I never have parts where the bottom of the sky will show. I might later, but I can always fix the sky later. So I've got this, and I'm going to now slide it over to the side. Now I'm going to go over to frame 240. I'm still on my middle ground layer, and I'm just going to slide it all the way to this side. Now again, it's not quite as wide as my sky, so when it moves, it's going to move a little bit more slowly because it doesn't need to move things as quickly to get from one side to the other. So I've got it justified there. I'm going to grab frame 240, insert, timeline, keyframe, and I'm all good. And then around at 120, right click, insert classic tween. So it's moving now from there. So now, if I look and I play my movie, Oh, that didn't work at all. What did I do wrong? So frame 240 is at the end. Frame 1 is also at that end. So I need to move that back for some reason. There we go. And now if I play through, I've got both my frames moving, both my layers are moving, but they're moving at different rates. One is faster than the other, which adds to the illusion of movement, which is awesome. I'm realizing now, yeah, I've got all my stuff set up. Now, again, I've got this little gap where the sky isn't showing, so I can lock my middle ground, I can unlock my background, choose that layer, and I can hold down Shift and I can Command T it till it's a little bit bigger and scooch it down. Awesome. And that's in frame 240. And if I go to frame 1, that looks pretty good. Resize it a little bit. We should be okay. So let me test that. I'll lock it and I'll test it all now. And I never see, if I'm looking at my hills to make sure I never actually accidentally see the background without any blue in it. But I'm okay. I'm all right. Now, I realized something when I watched that. My trees are cut off. So I actually need my middle ground layer to be much bigger. So again, I can go to frame 1. And I actually need these. If this is the top of my stage, I need to transform this guy until it's almost as big. It's still not big enough. I'm resizing it till it fills my whole stage. Great. So again, I justify it all the way to the side. Awesome. I get to frame 240. Need to resize. Oh, still not big enough because it gets cut off before the top. Cool, now it should be good. So now if I go back through and I hit play, there's not gonna be any weird cutoff of any kind. It's a little laggy, but that's okay. And I can, yeah, I'm pretty good. So I can always test it too by going to Control, Test Movie, in Animate, and it's gonna show you what it looks like. Now my sky and my hills are moving at different rates. You can't really tell, unfortunately, because they're fairly similar sizes. So, later I can go in and tweak that a little bit more, but that's pretty good. Let me lock that down for now. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is make a new layer on top of all this. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to call this Foreground. On my foreground layer, I'm going to start, I'm actually not going to start right at frame 1. I'm going to start at like frame 25. And I'm going to go to Insert, Timeline, Keyframe. And at that point, I'm going to bring in my tree. Now, I'm actually going to put my tree off to the side. I don't actually want it on my stage. My stage is defined by this rectangle, and it's not there yet. All right, I'm checking out what everything looks like, so then it's just going to pop up. But then I want it to move across really quickly. So I'm at frame 25, and then maybe by frame 50, I'm going to go Insert, Timeline, Keyframe. But now I'm going to move it to the other side off the edge of the stage. And you might say, what's the point? If you grab your little scrubber, scrub through, and it just sort of ports in and ports to the other side. That's not great. So what I need, again, is to go halfway in between, right-click, Insert, Classic Tween, and it's going to fill the difference. So now, if I scrub in, it's going to move across. Oops, so I just realized something. It's moving in the opposite direction as the rest of my background. That's not good. So let's change it. So I'm going to click on this keyframe at 25. I'm just going to move it to the back. And now I'm going to go to frame 50. I'm going to move it to the front. So I swapped it places. So now let's go ahead and let's test my video, and let's see if that worked out the way I needed to. So I'm going to go to Control, Test Movie, in Animate, And oh, there it went. Do you see it? It moved across. Cool. Okay. So then maybe a little bit later, I want another tree to go across. So maybe at frame 80-ish. And then I'm going to go to Insert, Timeline, Keyframe. And it's this. But this time, I'm going to shift and transform it down. It's tiny. Or maybe it's really big. Let's do really big. Let's do huge. Awesome. And I'm only going to do a few frames. So I'm going to go from 80 something to just a few frames out, maybe 10 frames. Insert, Timeline. It's angry at me. Keyframe. And I move it over again. And then I split the difference in between my two keyframes, and I'm going to hit Create Classic Tween. Let's see now if I move. I did it again. I did the same thing. I'm moving opposite directions. What am I thinking? So I'm here. My first frame, my first frame, keyframe, it should be on the right-hand side. Duh. And on my last frame, it should be on the left-hand side. I'll get this one of these days. And let's go ahead and do a Control, Test Movie, and Animate and see what that looks like. So my first tree zooms by, my second tree zooms by really quick. Awesome. So I've got things moving at different rates. Now, you might not have just an object for your foreground. Maybe you have a whole layer. So again, just make sure that it's moving at a faster rate, and you might start at frame 1 and go all the way to frame 240 and just put a tween in. But the bottom line is you should have 3 separate layers, a foreground, middle ground, background. They should all be different widths. The narrower it is, the faster it's going to move. Or, I'm sorry, the slower it's going to move. The wider it is, the faster it's going to move because it has to cover more ground in the course of 240 frames. So you went into Animate, you made 3 separate layers, a foreground, middle ground, and background layer, and now you're making 3 new layers in Animate, and you're bringing them in from your library in your keyframing and your tweening. So I hope that helped, and have fun.